welcome to A Moment of Bach, where we take our favorite moments from the composer's vast musical output, just a minute's worth or even a few seconds, and show you why we think they are remarkable. Today's episode is the beginning of a mini-series. Each year, we've taken a look at one of the great 6 Brandenburg Concertos. And this year, it's time to look at a newly released video by the Netherlands Bach Society of Brandenburg Concerto No. 1. We start with Alex taking a look at the first movement.
The first 2 measures of this first movement of Brandenburg 1 hit us with a bunch of musical material that it takes a while to process, I think. Sometimes Bach does this the very beginning of one of his larger works, whether it's a cantata or an orchestral work such as this. He likes to put the most complicated stuff right at the beginning. In the first 2 bars, there's a lot going on. I wonder, listener, what strikes you the most here. I bet for a majority of you, it's the same thing that struck me when I first listened to this recording. It's the horns.
For sure.
So let's listen to what's going on there. There's a triadic figure happening in the horns and strings. Bum, 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 bum. Just an F major triad going up to the higher F octave at the top. So 4 notes. That is shared by the horn and violin 1. And then the violin 1 has bum 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 dun da 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 da, like that, whereas the horn has bum 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 bum. So let's listen to the difference there. So again, that violin 1 part has 2 halves to this measure, 2 little bits of musical material. That's the bum 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 bum, followed by the dun da 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 da. Those are 2 separate motives in Bach's mind. The reason I know that he's thinking of those separately is because he separates them out in other parts of the music, in other instruments as well, even in this first measure. Now I'd like to draw your attention to the oboe. I haven't got to the elephant in the room yet, which is the crazy triplets that are going to happen in measure 2, and I'll get there. Those horn triplets are really something else, but first let's focus on this first measure. Now let's listen for the oboes. There are 3 oboes here. They're playing in harmony. This little 16th note figure that goes like this. Da 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 da, or ba da 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 da. They're in 3-part harmony after that first downbeat hits. So in the oboes, you have bum da 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 da, and those things continue. But the oboe 1 does share the second half of that measure with the violin 1. So it's bum da 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 bum ba 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 bum. You'll recognize the bum ba da da dum as the second theme from the violin 1 earlier. Okay, so he's connecting all of these things together then. He's got violin 1 with this 2-motive theme. He splits it out. The horn 2 part gets it in the first half of the measure. The oboe 1 part gets it in the second half of the measure. And of course, now that we've heard this a bunch of times, we're already used to hearing the bass line, but let's mention that the bass line starts on beat 1. It's the only thing that plays on beat 1. That would be the bass note plus the harpsichord, which you can hear on beat 1 as well. Now let's listen one more measure in, and this time focus on the bass line, what happens in the second measure. Did you hear how they got those 16th notes on the second measure? Da-da-da-da-da-da-dum. So they ended up with that 16th note line, which is the theme that we heard in the oboe 1 at the very beginning. Now, violins are going to get something different. A 16th note running line that sounds like this. Da 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 da. This kind of thing. Let's listen for that. That's violin and oboe 1 that you're getting that. But all of that really serves as the background, almost, to the triumphant horn call, kind of like a hunting horn call, that we're getting in measures 1 and 2 from the horns. So in measure 1, again from the horn 2, we have that bum 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 bum. And then you hear the horn 1 call out above it, a fifth above in imitation in the second measure.
although it's a little different.
Yeah, you're right. It's not exactly the same material because
the harmony doesn't change till beat 3 there. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's okay because the horns can play all those notes. It's not a given that the horn can play all these notes, but Bach knew which notes these horns could play because these are not the modern instrument.
Yes, let's get into that now. We need to talk about this because the difference between a Baroque violin, let's say, and a modern violin, I'm sure violinists would say that that's a big difference, but really to most non-specialists, right, even musicians who aren't violinists, the difference between a Baroque violin and a modern violin is not that extreme.
Yeah, it might maybe to a discerning ear you can hear that it sounds different. It's softer. It's lighter.
Right. The bow is different, as we've talked about before. The bow is shaped differently.
Yeah, you can see the bow is different. And from a violinist's perspective, they'd have all kinds of things to tell you about how it's played and how the modern instrument is, I'm guessing, more technically facile. Like you could do what would be considered harder music on the modern instrument.
Yeah, although some of the music written by Bach and his contemporaries are facilitated better on a Baroque instrument, according to Shansky Sato in one of the videos.
Sure, yeah. I mean, that's what he had.
Yeah. And it has to do with the bow, the give of the bow and other things. But anyway, what my point was is just to make the comparison, right? A Baroque horn versus a modern contemporary French horn is so different. There's a lack of all of the modern conveniences of a French horn. So Christian, you play French horn.
I do. I am an amateur horn player, and I played it in college. And the horn, as we know it today, if you play the horn, also known as the French horn, although in the world of horn players, we don't even bother with the French part. We generally just say horn in F, or F horn. And that's just because the way the horn is constructed, and these ones too, in this score, these are F horns because I see that the music is in the key of F major, but the horns are written in the key of C major, which suggests that they are transposed. And that's just because of the way that they are built. But the main difference is that in the horn that I play, the horn that you'll see now, you'll see what look like 3 or 4 buttons on it, generally 3 on it for the left hand to play. And those are called rotors. On the trumpet, they're called valves. Generally, we call them rotors. Here, they spin, and they redirect the air into different passageways that lengthen the tube of air by the correct amount. So it's actually pretty easy to conceptualize. You have a tube of air, that's what a horn is. It's just a pipe, and you're buzzing on one end, and then a pitch is coming out. And the modern horn rotors, you press one of them, the one in the middle, it turns out, it has a little tiny tube on it, and then you go down a half step. And then you press the one on your index finger, you go down a whole step, because that tube is a little longer. Press them both down, and you got 3 half steps, and so on. And the one on your ring finger is also 3. With combinations of just those 3 buttons, let's call them, you can fill the gaps between the natural pitches that can come out of this horn. And you can get any chromatic pitch you need. And you can see in this score or hear that this horn is not doing that at all. It's just doing the hunting horn call of the arpeggios. Bum, 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 bum. These are actually, this is just such an amazing thing about music that I was astonished to learn in terms of the intersection between music and science. It's not just that is the sound of a trumpet call or a horn call. It is, and in this era, it did stand for like going hunting with the dogs and hunting for rabbits or whatever they hunted for in
foxes or whatever.
Foxes. And also there's also a military connotation of horns, right? Like being called to battle, trumpets as well. But it's actually just pure acoustics, really, because those notes, those trumpet called notes, are the fundamental building blocks of the division of the way a column of air or a string or any musical sound is divided into simple integer divisions of its length. And so these are the natural, we call them partials, that you can play. So if you have a tube, these horns are just tubes, basically. You can play the bottom note, which is essentially, we call it the fundamental, the length of the entire thing. But usually you're playing upper notes in there. Those are called the partials. And that is what playing the horn or trumpet, especially the early horn and trumpet, is. All of the rotors I'm describing are merely ways to fill in the gaps between these notes. So now you can play anything. Then you could only play these notes. And the lower in the register they were, the farther apart they are. But because of the way the harmonic series works, the higher up you get, which you achieve by pushing tighter, smaller pressure through your lips, the closer together the notes are, but it's harder to play them. And so it really takes a level of virtuosity to play these instruments, especially in their higher ranges.
Yeah, and there's also the element of changing out the different crooks in these older instruments, right?
Yeah, they don't always have to be an F. They can be changed, yeah. And that's why you'll have like Mozart or Haydn symphonies where horns are able to play these triad figures in different keys, and then composers will get very clever and take 2 or 4 horns and give them all different crooks and put them all in different keys so that they can access different notes, all still before the rotor was even invented or used widely.
Yeah, this reminds me a lot of the history of kettle drums or timpani, which were used in Bach's day, in which we've covered a lot of pieces which have timpani in them, right? But in Bach's day, the tuning of these drums would have been just completely all manually done, and so you wouldn't be able to quickly tune the instrument. So typically there were 2 drums, and almost always they're in D and A, and they play in the key of D, and that's it.
Because you can't change them.
Right, and so the history, so now our modern timpani, if you've ever seen one, it's really cool. There's a whole pedal system that tightens or loosens the drum actively. Modern percussionists are expected to be doing this during pieces, sometimes tuning the drum, like during the rests between the notes that they're playing, in order to get different pitches. There's a famous example from the Aaron Copland Appalachian Spring, the full orchestra version, where the timpanist has, I think, the standard 4 timpani, which is a modern standard, but there's so many more than 4 notes, and the timpanist is expected to change pitches with the pedal a lot. So it's just a matter of instrument invention and the history of how the instrument has been innovated upon over the centuries. So here we get an early version of a French horn, and as you say, Christian, there's less that the horn player is able to do without these rotors or valves. But there are some other ways to change the pitches on a horn like this. You can use the hand and the bell, hand stopping, right? I believe this was done in this era, right, Christian?
I think so. We definitely do it in the modern time. Yeah, their hands are in it. I'm looking at the footage. You'll see in any performance, any orchestra performance, that the horn is played with the left hand on the rotors. In this case, these horn players have their left hand just holding it.
Right.
There might be some little like vents or buttons or something that do facilitate some tuning issues in those hands, so they might have some help. That's probably something that did happen in Bach's time. I'm not that much of an expert to know that small of a detail, but in the right hand, you'll see the horn player in this video, but also just anywhere, in modern horns too. Their right hand is in the bell.
Yep.
And the bell is pointed off to the side, facing behind them. This is really important. It seems counterintuitive. You would think that the best thing would be like what a trumpet and trombone does, which is point straight forward. But interestingly, the brass section is not all pointing in the same direction. You got tubas pointing up. You got horns basically pointing backwards. But that is all really effective because the horn is actually meant to sound bouncing off the back wall, in a sense. And that's part of the reason why they don't bother to make it point forward. But also, you want to have your hand in it because your hand can tune it. You're tuning it, the instrument. So these different notes of the harmonic, the natural harmonic series they all come out a little different, just the way acoustic physics works. And some of them are really out of tune they end up out of tune in the scale that you're trying to play in. So for example, in this score, all of the E's, this is not something that you would notice, just the horn players have to deal with this because they're fixing it, so we don't have to notice it. But all of the written E's in the horn part, which are sounding concert A's, so the third degree of the scale, the do, re, mi of the scale, are going to come out, if your hand is not in it, it's going to come out really flat. Now, if your hand is in there, your hand goes in it in sort of like a little cup shape with your hand. So to make a note flatter, you can close it a little. To make a note sharper, you can open it a little or take the hand out a little. And so I'm sure that they must be modulating that hand position. And on those concert A's, they're probably taking their hand out a little. So they're always moving their hand just a little. It's very subtle, but it's how we maintain control over the tuning of our notes. And in the modern horn, it's not even as big of a deal because we have those rotors. We wouldn't play some of those notes as openly as they have to do, but they have to use the hand even more, I would imagine.
So we mentioned a little bit that the hunting horn was used for hunting, but like, what does that mean? What was it used for? Was it just used to like get people excited about hunting? And no, the answer is it's actually a lot more complicated than that. There are different calls, different horn calls used for different elements of hunting. So I don't know exactly what this bum 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 thing is, but it's obviously something, right? It's probably something related to fox hunting. In doing a little bit of research here, I couldn't find exactly what that was. I'm sure there might be a listener who knows. Be interested to hear. But it's probably one of these fox hunting calls. Some of them are calls for the party to split off. Some of them are calls for the party to come together to hunt a certain animal that's close. Some of them are like intended to draw out a fox or intended to like scare the fox to go a different way so that the other party can catch them, or there's all these different little, and they're all different musical motives basically.
That's interesting.
There's a little song that you can blow on the horn to signify that's the end of the hunting day and it's time to go home. And as far as like bugle calls go, Christian, you and I are more familiar with like American military bugle calls. These are things that we sometimes hear in military ceremonies, sometimes at a military funeral or something like that. And so you have the da 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 first call. You have the bum bum da 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 da, which is the
wake up call.
Wake up, reveille call. Yeah, da 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 is like for the soldiers to assemble. And I'm sure each branch of the military has like slightly different ones, I would imagine. Taps is the slow one, that is the mournful one that's honoring a soldier who has fallen. And they all use, as you mentioned, Christian, they all use a bugle, which is just like these horns in the sense that they don't have valves or rotors and they just play the partials.
Yeah, all of the examples you just gave are playable on an instrument without buttons, that is valves or rotors. And so, quite literally, all of the things that you just said can be played by a tube, like a length of tube. And that is what brass instruments are. It's just like a pipe. It's
true.
A pipe. Well, on one end is a small opening that does have to be shaped correctly so that you can buzz into it. And then on the other end, to make it work the best, it needs to flare out into a bell. And that's kind of it. And they're curled up a lot because you need a lot of meters of tube. But it is kind of funny to just sit back every once in a while during like a band concert and think like, we're all just buzzing air into tubes. It's just funny.
Yeah, but it's actually kind of, I think it's really cool just how nakedly scientific it is. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like those partials are just overtone series of a note. And so those things are not like, it's not like this is specific to how air works in tubes. This is how like all music works. This is how all sound works. This is how your brain perceives sound in the first place. Whenever you hear a sound that can be stable enough to be called a musical pitch, then there is a series of natural overtones that are part of that sound. And if you were to draw out what those notes are, those are the partials that we're talking about. Those are the sounds that you hear in a horn call. And so in this music, just the way that Baroque music evolved and what Bach had to work with in terms of like the sort of rules, so to speak, of putting together music of this era, a major triad sounds nice. A dominant chord sounds pleasant, but it wants to go back to the tonic. These things are all having to do with the overtone series. And that's why a horn call like this just fits in perfectly. He knows exactly how to use it, which notes they can't do well, and he builds everything around that. And like I mentioned in these first two measures, all the motivic material is there. All the da-da-da-da-da, all the little things that are there. The horns are going to have those motives later in the piece too. And he knows that, and he knows to construct it so that it works that way. all just works. And that triplet figure, that is the moment of Bach for today. I love how it just interacts and it really clashes rhythmically, not harmonically, but rhythmically clashes with the 16th notes and all the other instruments. They're all going da 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 da, and then the horns go bum 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 bum. It's really interesting and odd, and it would have sounded to the audience not like, wow, this sounds very weird and rhythmically modern. It would have just sounded like, oh, there's a horn call. I remember what that sounds like, because last week I went out with the guys and we went hunting. Like that's what it would have been like to the probably a little bit more of the high society audience that this piece would have been heard by.
Yeah. Although,
if it was heard, because we know the history of the Brandenburg Concerto set of 6 concertos. I don't know when it was first heard.
Well, it does have a cantata source, but does that have horns?
Yeah, but didn't he write that later?
Oh,
no, maybe not. No, probably not. He probably wrote the cantata first. You're right, and that one does have horns. Yeah, I checked on that. Although it doesn't have the violino piccolo part. But the violino piccolo part, which I haven't even mentioned yet, I didn't mention because it doesn't really play anything special in this first movement. We'll have to wait for the later movements in which it does have a nice feature. And that actually will be what we look at next week. We will continue with Brandenburg Concerto No. 1. We'll look at the second movement. Nice contrast to what we heard today.
What a contrast. And now let's hear that horn call from the first movement of the Brandenburg Concerto No. 1 in F major. If this introduction to Brandenburg Concerto No. 1 has inspired you to hear the entire performance of the work, which was released by the Netherlands Bach Society several months ago, please see the link in the episode description. The Netherlands Bach Society has also released the other Brandenburg concertos. We've also, if you look in our backlog, we've also produced quite a few episodes because every year of our season of A Moment of Bach, sometime in the middle of the season, we have been taking a look at Brandenburg concertos in depth in a mini-series. And we started with number 3, and then we did 4. I think we did then 5 and 6, and now we're at now 1 and 2 are out, so we're to 1. And in each of those, there's several episodes that we've spent, one per movement, and now we're into our 5th mini-series on the Brandenburg concertos, which means that we'll spend a few more weeks on the rest of this one.
Until next time, enjoy those moments.